Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about adding shades and highlights to a drawing in Krita. So in this we'll see how we can turn a painting like this into a painting like that. This video is specifically intended to help those that are new to digital painting because shading can be one of the more difficult aspects of digital painting. So to start out with, I assume that you already have a painting that is separated into layers with an ink layer, a flats layer, and you can have a background layer as well. If you don't know how to do that, you should check out some of my other videos. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a shades layer and a highlights layer. And of course put the shades on one and the highlights on the other. But actually you can have any number of layers in here. So the typical process is to create a shades layer that has a multiply blending mode and then create a highlights layer on top of that that has a normal blending mode, and those are all sitting on top of your flats layer. So here I've created a background layer that's a very light gray color and just turned on the shades layer so that you can actually see the shading that I had done in this drawing. Notice that here I am actually using a color that's a shading color that's a flesh tone for the face, and then a shading that is darker than the white hair that he has. And so I'm not just using a gray, I'm actually using a color, and I am using multiply. Now if I turn on the flats and the ink and the shade layer, we can see what it looks like. And I'm going to go to the shades layer and you can see it's multiply, but it could just have well been normal. But notice that it's a little bit washed out when it's normal. So multiply kind of amps up the color a little bit. So you can choose to just paint with a darker color, or you can change the multiply. You can also change the opacity to affect how much shading that you have. So those are some of the controls that you can use in controlling your shading. Now let's take a look at the highlights, but I'll show you a trick here in Krita that's very nice. I'm going back to that layer 2, and I want to show this in a little bit darker so it's a little bit easier to see the highlights. So I'm going to change the foreground color by just dragging down here and make it a little bit darker, and then underneath edit I can do fill with foreground color, so it just fills that entire layer. So that's just a nice trick there. But as I look at the highlights, you can see that I am using colored highlights, not just white, and I have this set as normal. Now you can use the same technique of changing the opacity, and that's really why you want to work with lots of different layers, because you can change each of those things individually. Now you can change the blending mode. You can look at other videos online. There's all different kinds of things that you could do here, but I'm just showing you the basics. So what I've talked about so far is actually the easy part. The hard part is how do you actually do something that has a nice shade to it, a smooth blending. That's the more difficult part. So let's take a look at that. So here what I've done right now is I've turned off the highlights and the shade layers, and the techniques that I'll show you about the shading apply to highlights as well. And I've created a new shade layer, and nothing is on it, and that's where I will start painting. Okay, so what is the problem? The problem is, you know, if I just use a regular pen or ink, I don't really get a nice shade, and how do I deal with this? Well, if you haven't seen my video on the brushes, you might want to take a look at that. And here I've got the top 10 brushes. And for shading, what we're going to use is the airbrush. Now the airbrush typically has a very large brush, so here this resets it to default, and you can see it's very large, and that's good for background. But here we want to do the kind of shading that would be underneath his chin or the glasses or underneath his nose and things like that. So all you need to do is press Shift, and you can change the size of that brush. And don't worry, you won't lose it. If I click on this button right here, it resets the size. So I can change the size, I can change the flow, I can change any number of things. Now normally you might see this as opacity. If I click on this arrow here, that changes the flow level, but right next to it is another button, and you can see I can show the opacity. If I click on the plus, now it will show the opacity. If I click on the size, it'll show the size. If I click on flow, it'll show the flow. So I can set whichever ones, and if I want to go back to default, I click on that button there. So let me go ahead and delete what's on this new shade layer. I've set up a special button for that. You can check out the video about how to do that. And you can use delete, and that clears the entire layer there. Okay, so I'm going to just change the size of the brush to something like that. I've already selected my color. I'm making sure that I'm on the new shade layer, and I'm going to start painting. But the first problem is that I see that I'm going outside of the lines, and I'm coloring onto the glasses. I'm going to delete that and show, okay, well, the easiest way to deal with that is to go over to the selecting magic wand selecting tool. And if you look underneath tool options, and if you don't know how, if things aren't set up the way that you'd like, you can look at my other videos about how to arrange your workspace. But underneath the tool options, I've got anti-aliasing turned on, and this action is the first one. And the thing specifically you want to see is I grow or shrink by 1 pixel, and then I'm selecting by all layers. So I'm just going to go in here and click on the face, and you can see that this is now defined a region, so I can color only in here. So I won't actually color in the neck, and I won't color in the ears. If I press shift, I can add to that selection. So I'm going to now go back to the paintbrush and click on that, and now as I do the airbrush here, you'll notice it won't flow over to the ear, and it won't flow over into the neck. Now I'm explicitly being a little loose in this and just rough, just to show you how this works. Now I can continue to paint in how I want, and if I press E, this will actually turn the airbrush into an eraser, and you can see that right here, and I can actually erase areas, and so that can be a way that I can smooth out my shading, and I can make it larger to erase to give more kind of a blending type of thing. So that's one approach that I can use. But another approach that I can use is a blending tool. So let me first again delete, oops, don't want to delete the file. I want to actually delete the colors on this shade layer here. And so now I'm going to show this again, and I'm going to again be kind of rough and make sure that the eraser is turned off. Be kind of rough here, and I will show you the blending kind of tool. If you haven't seen the brush layers or my video on brushes, you might want to check that out. But here I'm going to select the top 10, and here I'm going to choose this blur, or the blender blur. And so as I do that, you can see how it blends in, and I can change the size to get kind of a blurry, nice blending there. So that's another technique that you can use. And again, I go back and forth between those two, and maybe add some more in there. So just some practice. So those are some ways that you can use. The Blender Basic can give you a little bit of a harder edge as you are trying to blend. So that's a nice thing that you might want to use. Now let me go ahead and delete that coloring as well, and show you that you can do this even. I'm going to select the ink pen, or the basic 5 size, and notice I'll have a very hard edge that way, and I'll even go underneath the eyeglasses here and maybe up here just to show you the kind of things that you can do. And so I can then go back to that basic blending, and you can see even if you start off with a hard edge, that's another approach that you can kind of do to blend things how you want. So if you want a more textured approach, you can take a look at this pencil quick shade, and you can see the kind of appearance that it gives, and it's a pretty nice look there, but it has more texture. The same thing, you can try all different kinds of brushes. This one here provides a kind of a colored pencil look to it, and this one here, the wet textured soft. Let me go ahead and delete the coloring that I have here. It gives you some texture. It kind of has a chalky type of look to it, but again, a very common thing if you're not used to digital painting, you may think that you can easily blend things, and it may not work as well as you'd like, so you might need to select the basic blender or the blur blender to blend things in a little bit better. So once I've finished with that, the chin, now this is not really finished, but I might move to the other section, and then I just go and select the magic wand tool, and then again select the other area, go back to the paintbrush, and choose whatever tool that I want, and add the color how I'd like it to be. So that's the basics of how you would do the shading. The highlighting would apply the same way, except for you just need to set the colors that you'd like. So I hope that helps. Enjoy painting.